Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Well, today we're tackling a topic that might sound like something straight out of the history books,
Oh.
but I think you'll find it's way more relevant than you might expect.
Intriguing.
We're talking about the plague.
The plague, huh?
Yep, the plague. We've got Wikipedia, Microbiology,
Oh, nice.
and this really cool site called microbe-canvas.com to guide us through all the,
The ins and outs.
exactly, the ins and outs of this, well, fascinating but also kind of freaky disease.
Sounds right up our alley.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So, when you hear the word plague,
Yeah.
what comes to mind? Like, what's the first image you picture?
Probably those creepy medieval masks, the ones with the long beaks.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Those are iconic.
And maybe a few unfortunate rats running around, too.
Right. That's kind of the classic plague image, isn't it?
Definitely.
But let's get a little more specific here.
I'm gonna lay it on me.
So when we talk about the plague, we're really talking about an infectious disease. And the culprit behind this disease.
A bad guy.
Yeah, the bad guy is a bacterium called Yersinia pestis.
Yersinia pestis, got it.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Maybe a little scary, too.
Huh.
There are actually three main forms of plague.
3.
Yeah, bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic.
So each one targets a different part of the body, then.
Bingo. And our sources, they don't shy away from the details, let me tell you.
So paint me a picture. What are we talking about here?
Okay, so imagine you're back in, like, medieval Europe,
Okay, I'm there.
and you start feeling sick, really sick.
Oh.
And then you notice these, like, incredibly painful swellings
Swellings where?
in your lymph nodes, especially around your groin.
Oof, that sounds rough.
It is. These swollen nodes are called buboes,
Buboes, okay.
and they're so nasty looking, so gruesome.
Really?
Oh, yeah, that they actually gave bubonic plague its name.
Wow, so that's where that comes from, huh?
Yep, pretty grim, right?
Definitely not a good time.
But hold on, we're not done yet.
There's more.
We've still got septicemic plague to talk about.
Septicemic. All right, what's that one all about?
Well, this one's even scarier, I think,
How so?
because it attacks the bloodstream.
Oh, yikes.
Our sources describe, like, a really rapid decline,
Oh, no.
with tissues turning black and dying as the infection spreads.
I mean, I know it's history, but it still sounds pretty terrifying.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like something straight out of a horror movie.
All right, so we've got bubonic, we've got septicemic,
That's
pneumonic.
pneumonic, right?
Yeah, you got it. And that one affects the lungs.
Right. That's the one you got to worry about spreading, isn't it?
Exactly. Pneumonic plague is, it's super dangerous.
Why is that?
It progresses incredibly fast, like way faster than the others.
Hmm.
And the worst part, it can be spread through the air.
Just like that.
Yep, just by coughing or sneezing.
Wow, that's scary.
And if it's not treated,
Oh.
it can be fatal within like a few days.
So not a lot of time to mess around then. Nope, not at all. Okay, so we've got these three pretty horrifying forms of plague.
Yeah, we've painted quite the picture.
But now the big question is,
Hit me with it.
how does someone actually get infected in the first place?
Yeah, how does this whole thing even start? Well, ready for this? The plague isn't spread person to person.
Wait, really?
Nope, not like a cold or the flu or anything like that.
Huh, so how does it spread then?
It's actually pretty surprising.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It all boils down to a tiny but mighty creature.
Let me guess. Rats.
Well, they play a part, but they're not the main culprit.
Okay, so what is it then?
Fleas.
Fleas. Seriously?
Yep, those little guys that make our pets itch.
No way. So those tiny things are responsible for spreading the plague.
Yep, that's right.
I mean, I know they're annoying, but I never thought of them as, like, deadly.
Well, they can be, at least when it comes to the plague.
Okay, so how do fleas actually spread the plague? Like, what's the process?
So it starts with an infected rodent, usually a rat, and a flea bites this infected rat and picks up the plague bacteria, that Yersinia pestis we talked about.
Right.
And this bacteria, it starts multiplying in the flea's stomach.
Multiplying, huh?
Yeah, and it gets so bad that it actually blocks up the flea's stomach.
So the flea can't eat.
Exactly. It's basically starving.
Core flea.
And a starving flea, well, it's going to be desperate to feed, right?
I guess so.
So this infected flea jumps onto a human looking for a meal,
Makes sense.
and it bites, trying to get some blood.
Okay, so that's how the bacteria gets into humans.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that.
Oh,
You see, because the flea's stomach is all blocked up,
right, from the bacteria.
as it's trying to feed, it ends up regurgitating some of that blocked up blood, infected blood, back into the bite wound.
Ew, that's kind of gross.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
But that's how the plague bacteria gets into the human.
That's it, through a flea's regurgitated infected blood.
Wow, that's both fascinating and disgusting at the same time.
I know, right? It's amazing how these things work.
Okay, so wait, if the fleas are the real spreaders,
Yeah.
what about the rats? I thought they were the ones giving us the plague.
That's a common misconception, actually.
Huh. So they're not, like, directly giving us the plague?
No, they're more like the first victims in this whole chain of transmission.
Oh, okay, so the fleas are spreading it from rat to rat.
Exactly. And sometimes, unfortunately, a flea carrying the plague bacteria ends up biting a human.
And that's how we get infected.
Bingo.
Okay, so let's say we're back in, like, medieval Europe,
Okay, I'm there.
and someone thinks they might have the plague. How would they even know? Like, how did doctors diagnose the plague back then?
Well, it wasn't easy, that's for sure.
What'd they do?
They would have to examine fluids from the buboes, the lymph nodes,
Oh.
or blood, or even sputum, you know, the stuff you cough up.
Right.
And they would examine all this under a microscope.
Wow, so they had microscopes back then.
Yeah, they were pretty rudimentary, but they got the job done.
So they were looking for the bacteria.
Exactly, searching for Yersinia pestis in those samples.
That sounds pretty time-consuming, like, especially when you're dealing with a potentially deadly disease.
It was, and not always accurate either.
Makes sense. So what about today? Like, is there a faster way to diagnose the plague now?
Oh, absolutely. Technology has come a long way since the Middle Ages.
Okay, so what do we use now?
One of the most common methods is PCR testing.
PCR, like the COVID test?
Exactly. It's a very sensitive test.
Okay.
It can detect even tiny fragments of the plague bacteria's DNA.
Wow, so they don't even need to see the whole bacteria.
Yep, just a little piece of its DNA is enough.
That's incredible.
It means doctors can diagnose the plague much earlier.
Which is good, right?
Absolutely. The sooner you start treatment, the better the chances of recovery.
Okay, so that brings us to the next question.
Shoot.
Do we all need to go out and get plague vaccines now?
Whoa, hold on. What?
Don't panic just yet.
Okay.
According to the CDC, routine vaccination for the plague isn't really necessary for most people. Really?
Yeah, it's mostly recommended for people who are at higher risk of exposure.
Like who?
Well, lab personnel who work directly with the bacteria, for example.
Makes sense.
Researchers doing aerosol experiments, or people working in areas where the plague is still prevalent.
So, unless I'm planning on playing with plague bacteria in a lab.
You're probably good to skip the shot.
Okay, good to know. But what happens if someone does get the plague?
If it's diagnosed early, the plague is actually treatable.
Really?
Yeah, with antibiotics.
Oh, wow. So it's not an automatic death sentence anymore.
Not at all.
That's good to know. What kind of antibiotics are we talking about here?
Well, there's streptomycin,
Okay.
chloramphenicol, tetracycline,
I've heard of those.
and some newer ones like gentamicin and doxycycline.
So with antibiotics, people can actually recover from the plague.
Exactly. Our sources say the mortality rate drops dramatically with treatment.
Dramatically. Like how much are we talking?
Without treatment, the mortality rate was around 70%.
Whoa, that's a lot.
Yeah, but with antibiotics, it drops to about 10%.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
That's the power of modern medicine.
It really is amazing, huh?
It is, but...
There's always a but.
Right. There's always a but.
So what's the but here?
Well, one of the biggest concerns with the plague is the potential for drug resistance.
Oh no, not another superbug.
It's a real concern, just like we're seeing with other bacteria.
So the plague bacteria can become resistant to the antibiotics we use.
Exactly. It's a constant arms race.
And are there any examples of this happening with the plague?
Sadly, yes.
Oh.
Back in 1995, a drug-resistant strain of plague was discovered in Madagascar.
Madagascar, wow.
And there have been outbreaks since then.
So this is a real problem, not just a hypothetical.
It is a real problem. We can't afford to be complacent.
That's a little scary, honestly.
I know, but awareness is key.
That's true. So let's shift gears a bit.
Okay, where are we headed?
Our sources mentioned something about the plague being used as a weapon.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
I know, right? Yeah. It sounds like something out of a movie.
It does, but it's a real part of history.
So how far back are we talking here?
We're talking ancient China, medieval Europe.
Seriously?
Oh.
They were weaponizing the plague way back then.
It's a pretty chilling chapter in human history.
How did they even do it back then? Did they have, like, plague bombs or something?
Not exactly, but some accounts describe using infected animal carcasses.
Wait, what?
Yeah, they would use carcasses, even human bodies sometimes, to contaminate water supplies.
That's horrible.
It is, and there are even stories of plague victims being catapulted over city walls during sieges.
Catapulted, like thrown over the walls.
Yep, it was a brutal tactic.
But was it effective? Like, did it actually work?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely spread terror and chaos.
Makes sense. Who wouldn't be terrified of the plague?
Exactly.
No.
One example that stands out is the Siege of Kaffa in 1346.
Kaffa, okay, what happened there?
The attacking Mongol army was suffering from the plague, and there's evidence they intentionally hurled infected corpses over the city walls.
Wow, that's just awful.
It is, and some historians believe this event may have contributed to the spread of the Black Death across Europe.
So whether it was intentional or not, it had a huge impact.
A devastating impact, for sure.
So this wasn't just ancient history. It sounds like the plague has been weaponized in more recent times too, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Like when?
During World War II, Japan's Unit 731 conducted horrific experiments with weaponized plague.
Unit 731, that's the one with the really awful experiments on prisoners of war, right?
That's the one, a very dark chapter in history.
So given all this, is the threat of the plague as a bioweapon still a real concern today?
It's a complex question, but the good news is that we have effective antibiotics now.
Okay, so that makes a difference.
It does, and many countries have stockpiles of antibiotics specifically for this kind of scenario.
So we're not totally defenseless.
Exactly, but it's still a threat we need to be aware of.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here today, from the different types of plague to its history as a bioweapon.
It's been quite the journey.
It has, and I think what really stands out to me is how complex this disease is.
I agree, and how adaptable the bacteria is.
Right. It's survived for centuries, and even though we have treatments, there's always the potential for drug resistance.
That's the thing about bacteria, they're constantly evolving.
And the fact that the plague has been used as a weapon throughout history is just, well, it's a chilling reminder of what humans are capable of.
It's a dark side of human history, for sure.
But knowledge is power, right? The more we understand about the plague, the better equipped we are to deal with it.
Absolutely, and that's why these deep dives are so important.
So to our listener, if you're as fascinated by the plague as we are, I encourage you to check out the sources we mentioned.
Yeah, they're worth a read.
Wikipedia is a great place to start for a general overview.
And Microbiology goes deeper into the biology.
And if you want to see some really cool visualizations of the plague bacteria, check out microbe-canvas.com.
Those visualizations are pretty amazing.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and maybe steer clear of any suspicious-looking fleas.
And wash your hands.
Always good advice. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.